But we thought there's so much we could talk to you about.
Yes.
As you are a poet,
Yes.
an activist, a farmer,
I am.
a grandfather,
Yes.
father, of course, which is kind of needs to come first. But you have been involved in politics for a very long time.
Yes.
And you used to be a Democrat, meaning that you kind of were related to the Democratic Party early on.
Yeah. That was because there wasn't a Green Party. I actually was part of the Circles of Correspondence, which was a bioregional movement. I was part of Planet Drum Foundation in San Francisco, and they had this talking about what was going on in Europe because Europe had the Green Party, and we were very interested. But when the Green Party started, it was a debating society. Everybody just argued. They weren't putting up candidates. So I didn't get involved, so I ran the first time as a Democrat. But about halfway through my first term, we had a change in the state law that made a minor party with just 1,000 members eligible to be on the ballot if you were nominated by your party. So I no longer had to go through a petition process to get on the ballot, and my name would appear as a Green. So I changed parties halfway through my first term.
Now, this is really interesting because did you really know there was a Green Party in the US?
Actually, I heard when Ralph Nader was running, which
Right.
was a long time ago. I think.
Right. That was sort of the beginning. We had our first national convention here in Denver. I got to give the invocation, and I campaigned for Nader. And our county actually got the most votes of any county in the country for Nader. And that was because I was running, and I got 70% of the vote that first time I ran, and Nader, or a second time actually, and Nader got 16, 17% of the vote, more than anywhere else in the country, which isn't much, but it was interesting that, and this is what turned me on to what was going wrong with the Green Party, is that he rode my coattails in a local election because in the local we were strong, but in the national we were very weak. And so having him get less than 5% meant that we never got any federal money.
But there you go. That's an interesting point because we're in Austria. I mean, it's now 2019. It's November because this will live on the internet possibly forever and ever.
Yeah.
So let's be precise. And in Austria, there are negotiations between the Conservative Party and the Greens, and it's looking pretty good that they will form a government on the national level.
Yes.
So when I hear something like, oh, the Greens get only 5% federally or 10, or where is the Green Party now? What, in a different political system, would it play a role in the US?
Oh, it could if they focused, as I've championed forever, to build the party from the bottom up. One of our we have 10 commandments, 10 key values, where instead of the pillars, which makes more sense. And I usually just pick out 3 of them because you can't give people 10 different platform planks that make sense. So to me already, they've muddied the water by adding too much. And it becomes a purity police kind of game. You can't be a candidate unless you support all 10, which is tricky because if you're a Democrat or Republican, you don't support all of their planks, you support some. So anyway, one of our major key values is grassroots democracy. And yet we don't build from the grassroots. We run celebrity campaigns with big names in the state and the federal and try to win that way. Every third party in history has done that. And every third party in history has lost. So why can't we have a smarter analysis here and say, okay, let's put our energies at local elections. Let's focus on one state or 2 states, and let's really try to get local officials elected. If we did that, I think the Green Party would be more successful. But as it is now, we keep running national candidates. And Ralph Nader was the one who was most famous, and he did really well. The last one was a good person, but when she called me, I told her the same thing. It's a mistake to run on the national level and end up supporting the Republicans. And that's what the claim is. Some people say the Greens on the national level were funded by the Republicans. What?
Because however few votes they take away, they would be taken away from the Democrats.
They never owned up to the fact that Nader's campaign was one of the reasons why Gore lost, because he took away enough votes in some states that made the difference. Now, Gore lost his own state, so it wasn't just the Greens. But the Greens never own up to the fact that, indeed, they didn't help. They actually hurt the progressive cause in this country. So I think the Greens are... I'm still a Green. I believe in the Greens. I believe in the 10 key values. I believe in the 4 pillars. I believe in the Green Party internationally. But I don't think our strategy is right in this country.
Let's just, because we haven't mentioned at least the 4 pillars. Although, let's run through the 10. I mean, we've got time. Let's run through the 10.
No, I don't even remember. There's feminism, future focus. I mean,
the 4 pillars. The
ones I believe in is social justice, environmental wisdom, grassroots democracy, and peace. I'm definitely a person who supports the peace movement. For 10 years, we had a monthly peace march that we ran here in Telluride, down Main Street, to make people aware that we after 9/11, on the 11th of every month, to show that we had gone to war instead of taking that opportunity to make peace around the world. It would have been a different situation, I think, if we had really recognized that we had an opportunity to have more peace. But again, this is a capitalist system, and it's built on war. It's interesting. I'm just reading a book now, a wonderful book, that explains how the American Revolution was really the product of a world war. And we don't realize that France and Spain and England and the Netherlands were all at war. And the only reason we won our revolution was because of the French allying with us, the Spanish taking Pensacola, the Battle of Gibraltar. There were all these other events. But because of this concept of manifest destiny and American exceptionalism, we tend to think that we did it all ourselves, which just is not the case.
So now, given the political system, this 2-party system, which you've kept from the modified but somewhat kept from the Brits, however, could people like you who say things that in American mainstream politics are, well, let's say really minority things, but people in the rest of the world, I guess, like hearing, how could you ever come into, maybe not even power, but into more of the light to work for those kind of policies?
Well, again, I think in this country we get seduced by media. So I was a member of Earth First. For 10 years, I was their poetry editor. And our motto was no compromise in defense of Mother Earth, which sounds good, except compromise, if you go back to its roots in Latin, mittere to send, com with, pro towards. So sending something forward with the help of others is our political system. When you say no compromise, you mean no, you're not going to work together. Running candidates on the national and state level, to me, is like saying no compromise. We're just going to go out there and get our story told. But that isn't how the system works. Getting your story told doesn't make people convinced or feel there's any power involved. You need to have political power if you're going to have a political party. And so for me, the strategy would be, let's work at the local level and build from the bottom a strong green presence in counties, in towns, and in states. And then we can move on to the national level. So I don't look my own voice as being important to get onto the national level. I do think it's important to be a strong green voice on my local level. And in that process of being a county commissioner, I was able to get on state committees. I was able to, I just did this interview with a conservative university head in Grand Junction where they've moved the BLM because it's so conservative. And he was very respectful of my work representing the very progressive energy of the community, even though I always lost in the club, the group that formed in the state on the Western Slope to represent our interests. I got elected to statewide office in our local association of 60 counties here in Colorado, and I got sent to the National Association of Counties with 3,000 members, and I got a leadership position there. as a Green, I felt that was the way we build forward. We build from the bottom up. So people in D.C. from different counties got to see that a Green was a reasonable person. Maybe they had different views, but they were reasonable. They're willing to work with you. Same on the state level, and of course on the local level. After 20 years, I was able to do that future focus and go back and make a formal apology to the Ute people who were moved illegally from the land here. And we went from our government, we made a formal apology to the Ute tribe in Utah where they were moved. That to me was a Green vision that I was able to accomplish after 20 years. That was totally mine, totally Green, but I was able to convince the community because I built the support, I built the credibility of 20 years of being in office.
And that's something that hasn't yet happened on a national level.
No.
Yeah. Would you? Because I have so much, then I'll let you.
Well, I just wanted to say that the Greens also in Europe started like this. It took them quite some time until they get into parliament, but they started as a grassroots organization, and then eventually, after like 10 years, I think, they made it.
And then
they had quite some trouble in the beginning.
Yeah, and then they had a dip again, but now they're back.
Sure. Well,
back,
we watched carefully the Realos and the idealists, the people who were party purists, and we have that same split here. I'm definitely a Realo. I believe that we need to look at the situation as it exists, and my strategy is very different from the people who are purists in the organization, and so that's a problem. Because we are such a minority, because we are in battle, because the system is set up against us for third parties, people tend to be more purist. And that's why we end up with these quixotic campaigns that are supposed to educate people, and all they really do is show how weak the progressive values are.
Okay, you've said it, you're Realo.
Yes.
I like that. You do not necessarily, which I also am so happy with, look like one would imagine a Realo to be, at least in our conservative Europe, yeah? I'm so glad you didn't cut your hair yet, so no.
Let me tell you though, when I first started in politics, one of my wealthy advisors said, "Look you're going to have to cut your hair." And I said, "No, I'm not. I'm going to be who I am." I've learned in Colorado, people here are very welcoming of who you are as you are. But if you try to pretend you're something else you're not, they just smell it. So for me, it was important to represent who I am. So yes, I am a Realo, but I purposely continue to look like a wild hippie from San Francisco, which I am, in order to break down preconceptions of people. So the next time they see someone, they're not sure where they are until they find out who they are.
Authenticity. I mean, it's the thing. You said as a Realo, you concern yourself with what you experience are really the issues. Let's talk about that, and let's talk about that on a national level, because we went to visit Politicon in Nashville recently. Unfortunately, I didn't find a single Green present. And the only people with longer hair were there only rarely, so I don't know what they did. But how shall I phrase this? There appears to be a rather aggressive moment in history where the two classical political sides of the United States, the Democrats and the Republicans, are facing off in a way, and especially in a language, and I repeat myself in all those interviews, which for me is scary, deeply worrying. Give us your view of where the US of A stands right now internally, and we may move on to that.
Well, we have, internal contradictions in our system, and we started out that way with slaveholders and non-slaveholders, and that led to a civil war. We're getting to a place where people are feeling very strongly that the other side is demonic. The other side is completely wrong. And both sides are feeling this, the left and the right. So what I found myself doing in politics when I stepped into that and watched and made a good analysis of what I saw happening was to champion the radical middle. And what that means is that I look to work in the middle and with both sides and try to find some unusual, strange, different kind of energy to bring someone close enough together to move something forward. So it's understanding the process of compromising, not losing your values, but being able to shorten your values. You know, my vision of what the world is way across the room. In my lifetime, in my time in office, I'm going to get an inch or two forward. But I'm going to move in that direction. For me, that's the way we ought to be addressing the situation. And that's why I'm willing to work with conservatives or environmentalists or radicals of the left or right if they're willing to work together. Unfortunately, we have gotten to a place where the standards of civility have been thrown out. And the reason is the people on the right formed a Tea Party because they were just unhappy. Their Republican representatives were mainstream Republicans, which means not only were they for small government, but they were also for big power wealth. And so that dichotomy within the party fractured. And what happened is the people on the mass of the people wanted them to be the party of conservative values, not of big wealth and supporting big wealth. So you find the party, people electing to office, people who do not compromise, who are elected specifically to fight for what they believe in. And, you know, now we're seeing the left do the same with Bernie and Elizabeth Warren, who I support. I think she's great. But I realize that if we're going to move forward, you really have to find that radical middle. The Quivira Coalition, which is a group of people in New Mexico who bring agriculturalists and environmentalists together, call it the Radical Center, which is the same kind of thing, except I don't think it's one place. I think it's a muddle that we get to in the middle where you might move a little bit, you might move a lot. But nevertheless, the only way we're going to be able to move forward is to get over this. If we don't, look what happened with the internal contradictions at the beginning of our republic. We ended up in a civil war. And I'm afraid that's a possibility, not one I envision or want to have happen, and one I will work not to have. But if we get to a point where you get demagoguery like we have in the White House presently, that could push us into armed conflict, I'm afraid.
Do you think that this situation started with Donald Trump or started way?
Oh my gosh, you know, the contradictions are way in there. I thought, we all thought Nixon was really culpable for lying, but every president after that has had to lie. And I get it. I'm in politics. I understand. If you're a rancher and I tell you I'm a champion of feminism, you're not only not going to talk to me, you're never going to deal with me. If I told the environmentalists I'm a champion of having guns in rural areas, they're not going to talk to me. I'm suddenly verboten. So for me, it's really hard to be able to work in that middle place if I'm totally revealing of everything that I believe in to everyone. So I tell people different stories and I focus on different things when I talk with them. I don't talk about feminism. But when I got in office, our planning commission was all male and I turned it into a balanced planning commission. I didn't announce that I was championing feminism. I didn't announce I was doing... I just did it. And so sometimes it's worse if we kind of speak things that we don't want everybody to know. And if you're running an international spy agency for a capitalist mercantile empire, as we are, you can't tell the truth. You have to. You can't tell the citizens everything. You can tell them some things, but some things you can't. But that's a kind of gray area, and then that can easily move into what we have presently, where we just have a complete liar at the White House, someone we've elected who just tells untruths all the time, which is different from not revealing a secret mission to rescue an aid worker in Syria, which we wouldn't hear about till afterwards, and you wouldn't want to hear about it till afterwards. So it's not like it's so simple. Most people who are purists are cut and dried. There's right and there's wrong. But I believe, like Erik Erikson, one of a great sociologist, psychologist in our country, that there are strengths and weaknesses to any action. If I kill you, I get rid of somebody I don't like. That's a strength. But I face all these repercussions for doing that. That's a weakness. And when I weigh them out, well, it doesn't sound like a good idea, even if I wanted to. So I think strengths and weaknesses are a better paradigm. And in that case, I'm willing to make some adjustment for stuff. But unfortunately, we have ideologues in government instead of real people trying to balance energy, which for me was my goal as a politician, was to balance the energy. It wasn't to change the world. It wasn't to have a revolution. It wasn't to make green values suddenly sprout up everywhere. It was to represent the people I had in my constituency and to balance the energy and try to move green values forward slowly.
You are, and that is what brought me to you. Many years ago, and we had wonderful adventures amongst other places in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's for another time.
Yeah.
But at the last deeply critical moment for the United States, in my opinion, at the late 60s, Vietnam, it was the poets, it was the musicians, it was arts, culture that very publicly stood up and, in my humble opinion at least, played a very significant role in society then deciding to get its act together. Let me put it that way. Mm-hmm. Is that happening at all now? Is it happening but it does not gain traction as it might because of different media that we have? Where are the voices? Where are the beats? And what I'm talking about is not a song here or there, but those people who sharp as a knife, as Alan and all your old friends. I mean, well, we may mention that you actually knew all of the gods of poetry. What's happening there? What's happening?
Well, it's a different table. We're at a different playing field here now. Media is not the concentration of newspaper or print or television that it was in the 60s and 70s. Now those organs of influence have become controlled by somewhat conservative elements mostly. And so what you see is not a willingness to reach out and dig up those stories. Take the newspaper in our little town here. It doesn't do any investigative journalism. And stories that are controversial, it doesn't cover. And that happens in small towns, but it's starting to happen on the national level. We don't have information about artists and poets doing demonstrations. And that's because there's so many of us. I mean, think about it. In my lifetime, we have gone, in this world, from 2.6 billion people to 7.7 billion people right now. In my one lifetime. And I point that out always because we forget, with this bigger field that we're playing with so many more people, it's harder to have influence. So in order to have influence, you have to be outrageous. Look at the yippies before the yuppies. The yippies were a powerful movement in the 60s and 70s. That was impressive. Now it's hard to have a national movement like that. And what you have is social media. You don't need newspapers. I find my information about events. I look on Facebook. I look on Twitter. I look on social media, and I can find out in an hour what's happening in my county that I won't find out even on our radio station because they're not out there, but people are out there. So everyone suddenly is a publisher. And so a lot of the arts are publishing themselves. But that means that a lot of people who aren't in the arts don't see it. And so I think one of the issues is that we have democratized the publication energy in this country. And what that means in reality is that everyone is a newspaper, everyone is a publisher, and you tend to go towards the people you like. And what you do with people you don't like, well, you unfriend them. And so we have unfriended half of our community. And that's the problem, I think, with on the national level and can be on the local. Now, I live in a little town, a mostly conservative town, and I'm a radical presence. Look at I have my beard braided in front of me. Nobody does this. It's crazy. But what I try to do is present someone very different from who people are in my community, and yet let them know that I'm not an enemy. I'm a friend, and I'm friends with a lot of people. Not everyone, but most of the people in my community. If we could continue our friendships, if we could have the kind of friendships that used to be common in Congress, we wouldn't have this kind of vitriol. But if you don't produce vitriol, your base doesn't vote you in. So it's a conundrum for a politician, which is one of the reasons why I've never tried to go beyond local politics, because it's a losing game. You have to lie. You have to cultivate your base. You'll see people who were moderate Republicans become rabid Tea Party people. Why? Well, that's their base. If you want to be elected, that's what you do. So we're in a tough situation in terms of the media. I don't think you're seeing the kind of energy on the national level that we had in the 60s. And you know what? It's a tricky situation. You know, I thought Nixon was bad. I thought the Bushes were bad. I thought Reagan was a criminal. And yet now we have someone in the White House who really is a criminal, clearly. So we have gone from bad to worse when we moved right. And you know, one of the beauties of the American political system is the zigzag walk we do. We go left, we go right. We go left, we go right. What that means is we never go only this way, we kind of go this way. And when we do it that way, no one side gets total power. And in a way, that's a good check and balance. It's not good on international relations when we leave the Kurds to be attacked by the Turks after being our allies. I mean, that is reprehensible. Absolutely. So our system has some strengths and it has some weaknesses. And I think one of the weaknesses we're seeing is the right is getting righter and the left is getting lefter. And unfortunately, that means the people in the middle, which is the vast majority of us, are left out.
Quite the same as is happening in Europe. Yeah.
I think so, yes. I see the same there.
We made a good kind of circular movement.
Yeah.
And there's certain questions, simple ones, that I like to ask everyone.
Yes.
On this journey. One is, who or what inspired you to go on your life's journey?
Well, I started out as a Roman Catholic seminarian for 7 years, so I spent time going from our kind of, there's a, Robert Bly, the poet, has a three-brain kind of paradigm. It's not exactly true, but there's the reptile brain, the mammal brain, and the neocortex, which is sort of the spiritual brain. And I jumped from a lizard, a reptile kind of society, business, dog eat dog, into past the mammal up completely, no sex, stay away from women, to try to have a spiritual direction. That was a great impetus for still having a spiritual grounding. I don't follow, well, I do follow what happens in the Catholic Church because it's so outrageous, but I don't belong. I'm not a Christian per se anymore. I think there are many wonderful people who follow this person, if he existed in Middle East. But for me, that's not my path. I was influenced a lot by Harvey Milk when I was in San Francisco. Harvey Milk and was my representative from my district to the council in San Francisco. And I remember meeting him on the street. I remember him coming to every meeting, meetings of older people, meeting of everybody. He may have been gay and he, like I am green, but he represented everyone. And you could talk to him on the bus because he took the bus downtown. He didn't take a limousine like most of those politicians did. He was a wonderful man. When he was assassinated, it really moved me. It got me wanting to be involved in politics. And then when I got to Colorado, I met Dolores LaChapelle, a deep ecologist, author, writer, Tai Chi teacher, a wonderful, wise woman of the mountains who lived just over the mountains here in Silverton. And her way of the mountain, as she called it, which was really a deep ecology kind of pathway, really moved me in the direction of getting involved in my community and making community. Because if there's one thing that makes us resilient, I think, it's not infrastructure, it's relationships. And if we build relationships, if we build community, we are stronger for it, because we can't imagine what kind of changes are really going to happen. And there's going to be a lot. There's always a lot. Change is always happening. So the way to be resilient is to create community. And Dolores really approved of the fact that poetry, which is one of the pathways, I think, to getting back in touch with the natural world, poetry, especially bardic poetry, when you speak for place, gets us to understand where we live and the relationships between all of the animals and plants and landforms that are around us. So poetry and then politics for the social aspect, to get people creating community within the political system. And you can, like I say, you can do that on the local. It's pretty hard now to do it on the state or national. But so my antecedents, the people that I look to, both encouraged me to create community in poetry and create community in politics, and that's what I've done.
Thank you. I've known you roughly 25 years, and I've seen you a little frustrated. I've seen you sometimes a little tired because you do a lot, but I've always experienced you as being fundamentally positive and life-affirming, and I think I can say that. What is the single thing that you would say that scares you most? There's so much going on and people are so frightened. Is there something in what is currently on the plate amongst those changes that are always going on, where you say, that scares me, I'm not sure how?
You know, at this stage of my life, I don't feel fear. I'm not scared. I don't think fear is a useful emotion unless you are in immediate danger. And then it is a very wise emotion and one that moves you to action. You know, anger and fear are important emotions. We can't deny them. We need to understand them. And they should move you to action. If you have fear or anger and you don't act, then it all turns internal. It becomes fury, or you're absolutely out of your mind with fright. No, I don't see anything happening right now that scares me particularly. What I want to do is try to move us in a direction that we can be resilient, that we can be wise. You know, when I used to ask Dolores, you know, what's the future? And, you know, what was going to happen? She'd say, it's hopeless. And intellectually, I have to admit, it is hopeless. But I live for hope. I believe that maybe there's miracles ahead. If we're galloping forward at 7.7 billion people on this one little globe with limited resources, and we have political systems that favor the rich, as we see all over the world, from Chile to Hungary, everywhere, we see the same kind of energy. We are probably in for a lot of disruption. And I'm hopeful that the people that I've helped nurture can help face that with as much generosity and compassion as possible.
Well, the last question would have been, what gives you most hope? You have answered that. So I would ask you to do something. I didn't anticipate it. Thank you for the gift. Could you choose one of the poems here and just read it so that we have testimony of what you really are?
Yeah, give me a moment here, because
take your sweet time. The machines have stopped.
Okay, yeah. You can move that around.
We can move that around.
Let's see.
You've gone to lunch.
40. Yeah, I know you have limited time. Let me see.
No. For you,
this is. I have a political element. Let's do this one. This is maybe, again, focusing on the fact that we always think globally now because we are in touch all over the world. I know what's happening in Chile, and 10, 15 years ago I would have no idea. And I know not from just the newspapers or from the internet, because I don't use newspapers anymore. I don't buy newspapers. I have it online. I have it from people who live there, people I know who are living there. So I have a direct line to what's going on. So it puts me directly in touch with the world. But what that wonderful phrase, think globally but act locally, is what I believe in. So here's a poem called Colorado. Hey, McRed-Eye says, I'm no pacifist saint. I eat meat, swat mosquitoes, usually on sight. Even as a conscientious objector, I personally wouldn't stand by and watch thugs of any stripe take down women and children. There is a life worse than death. But count me out of preemptive strikes, drone attacks, all those boosters of foreign wars. I didn't have to ship out to Nam to know hell. I've heard the stories, imagined the nightmares. In self-defense, or to protect the weak, I'd kill, but not until they invade Colorado.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, man.
Well done.
Thanks for your time.